Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Ashley.
And I'm Katie.
And today we're talking about health perfectionism. But Katie, before we get into that, we just wrapped up the first ever plant-centered retreat, and it was unbelievable.
Yes, we had a lovely time. We enjoyed beautiful food and camaraderie, and we made friends for life.
I agree. It's the most incredible group of women. I feel like every one of them was there for a reason.
Yeah.
So glad we did it. But the question is, Katie, are we going to do another one?
Ooh, I guess time will tell.
So stay tuned on whether or not we do another one. We'll probably announce this. My guess, Katie, is probably around like within the first couple months of 2023. So we've got a little ways, but we're going to kind of figure some things out and see what we want to do. All right, so let's dive into today's topic, which is all about health perfectionism. Katie, she brought this idea of doing a podcast on health perfectionism to me a little while ago. And we recently sent out an email to our clients talking about it. And again, this was like, okay, this is a topic that we need to expand on. We need to talk more about. And what prompted this idea was, well, kind of, I know Katie's been wanting to do this for a while, but what kind of like put the nail in the coffin, I guess, was I did a reel talking about Oreos a while back, and we'll link it below. And it was meant to be a funny reel. And a lot of people got a kick out of it. But of course, it came with a flood of comments talking about how, quote, bad Oreos are, or how the ingredients in Oreos are bad, how you shouldn't be eating them. And one thing Katie and I adhere to pretty strongly is not demonizing any food or any ingredients unless you're allergic to them or they're going to make you sick or whatever. But for the most part, we really try to avoid that. And part of this reason is because we are incredibly passionate about intuitive eating, and we both have our own experiences in our relationship with food and things that we've done to try to improve our relationship with food, which is a never ending, beautiful journey.
You listening, you may be just starting. Ashley and I are both in different stages of our journeys. And so, yeah, this was a long time coming. And I think something that maybe isn't talked about enough, especially in the age of social media, where we're getting a lot of influence from the health and kind of plant-based communities. This is definitely something that I've struggled with as a woman, as a firstborn, and definitely something I have studied a lot to try to figure out, my behavior patterns and thought patterns. And I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
So it's something near and dear to my heart. So, part of my legacy that I want to leave is to hopefully alleviate some of those, those same kind of struggles with other people.
Yep, absolutely. And I do want to note that even though there are some overlaps, we're not referring to orthorexia nervosa, which is an eating disorder that involves an unhealthy obsession with optimal nutrition. So there are going to be some overlaps, but what we're going to be talking about is health perfectionism and trying to eat, quote, perfectly, things that we see in the plant-based world and the intuitive eating world, heck, just in the world in general. So we're going to expand upon that a little bit more. Now, there's not a clear definition for health perfectionism. I think, Katie, you and I both were just researching to see if anyone's like really talking about this. And I think people are, but there's no clear definition. But Brown University defines perfectionism as this, quote, perfectionism refers to a set of self-defeating thoughts and behaviors aimed at reaching excessively high, unrealistic goals. Perfectionism is often mistakenly seen in our society as desirable or even necessary for success. However, and we're going to talk about this, recent studies have shown that perfectionistic attitudes actually interfere with success, and the desire to be perfect can rob you of a sense of personal satisfaction. So, we're not saying that trolls on the internet shaming people for eating Oreos are perfectionists, but you can kind of see where there's parallels that we can draw there.
Oreo trolls.
So why is health perfectionism not beneficial? Being perfect is simply stated Impossible. No human is perfect. When you're always striving to be perfect and forever coming up short, you're at risk for a whole host of issues, which we're going to go into. According to research examining 43 different studies over 20 years, this was done by York St. John University. Perfectionism is linked to a lot of different things like burnout, as well as depression, anxiety, and even mortality. So, if you're constantly striving for this in your eating journey, plant based journey, and really this can be applied to anything, life will always disappoint you. You will always disappoint you when you're striving to eat perfectly or even live perfectly. Katie's nodding her head, and I know she's ready to say something.
I'm ready to say amen.
Yeah.
Especially with when you're dealing with health perfectionism, we're going to talk about it come from that perspective. It has a huge trickle down effect with the rest of your life. So, even if you're talking about just from a wellness perspective, I mean, that will leak over into relationships and, your career and how you raise kids and, a whole host of things. So, keep that in mind. We're going to be kind of looking at it from a health lens, but it's a lot of the same, things that we're going to talk about applies to kind of an overall perfectionist attitude or approach to life. So one example I don't know if I've told Ashley this story or not. In my former life, I used to be an event planner. I loved it. So I worked with a lot of brides, and we had this kind of career making event that was like over $200,000. We planned it for over a year. It was this, 600 people. It was beautiful. And my boss and I, unfortunately, share this kind of perfectionistic tendency. And so, if you can imagine kind of a big, beautiful tent and this big, expansive ballroom floor put in on this big estate, and there was a live like 20-piece band behind the dance floor up on a stage, and we had 6 silver huge candelabras behind the band, and it had flowers, and it was just kind of a kiss of ambiance, and it was just there for decoration, and the whole thing was beautiful. There's so many things that could have gone wrong. Anybody who's planned a big event or a wedding, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. It actually was super smooth. Everybody had a great time. The bride and groom were thrilled. It was a company-wide, like the biggest event the company had ever had. And these candelabras, because of the weather, they're the battery operated candles, and they kind of sat in the candelabras. The candelabras each had maybe 6 arms, and one of the candelabras, one of the batteries of the candelabra candles must have gone out throughout the event. And so in some of the pictures, you see this kind of empty space where a candle should have been. And that is all I could focus on. I could not enjoy for 2 seconds a year worth of work for this beautiful event. All I could think about was why that battery was out and that those pictures were not perfect. And that still sticks with me. And looking back now that I've done a lot of personal work, I'm just like, that, I used to take a lot of pride in being a perfectionist, right? That was part of my identity. I was like, if it's not right, I'm going to keep doing it until it's right, or I'm just not going to do it. And looking back, it's like that attitude and that approach to life robbed me of so much joy and happiness, and not just robbed me of the good stuff, but added this weight and negativity and kind of had this black cloud on anything that I did because it was never good enough. And that's the thing about perfectionism. It's a race you're never going to win. It's impossible. Nothing is ever going to be perfect. And to set yourself up for those standards, you are robbing yourself of joy. And that is what life is about, right? we'll get off we'll get off that story. But again, that's why I'm so passionate about it, because that's just one example of many. And then you don't even get to enjoy it. What's that about? Like, what's the point?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people listening right now are like, oh, I have several things that I can think of off the top of my head where it's like, and because it sounds like you planned this gorgeous event. It took a year to plan, a
It was
massive
beautiful.
budget. And here, all you could think about with this is one thing that completely robbed you of enjoying this experience and all the hard work that you had done.
I know. Not only does perfectionism, cause, depression, stress, anxiety, but it can also, again, affect your relationships. I've had a lifetime struggle with kind of low self-esteem, which pairs so well with this kind of perfectionist attitude, because you're never enough. Your efforts are never enough. So you have no celebration, and you never reach the mountaintop. You're striving for this success, and in society, that kind of attitude where we have to have grit and determination and hardcore focus and eye on the prize, that's celebrated. But a lot of times, if you have that approach and you don't celebrate on the way and you don't celebrate on the journey, and then if nothing's ever good enough by the time you reach the top of the mountain, if you ever do, you don't even get to enjoy it.
So we can tie this back to plant-based eating, your health, however you identify in the way that you eat. I know that a lot of people struggle when they go vegan or plant-based. It's like you see things on social media and you're like, well, I'm not doing that, or I'm not doing all these things, or I'm not eating, quote, as I hate this word, I'm going to use it anyway, as clean as this other person, or, as perfectly as this other person, or whatever that is. And you're constantly comparing yourself. Even when you're going plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, whatever it is, if we wait until those conditions are perfect to start, then we're never going to start. If we wait until we're in the perfect environment, perfect city, or there's a vegan restaurant or whatever that is, it's never going to happen. Or we have the perfect meal prep containers or the perfect kitchen, like all these things, it's never going to happen. And I remember my business coach, when I first started Plant Centered Nutrition, he said this multiple times, like, you just got to do it. He's like, stop waiting for it to be perfect, because you're never going to do it. Stories came out several years ago on Instagram, and I remember being terrified to jump on stories because I'm like, well, what if I mess up? Or what if I, something, like there's a piece of trash behind me while I'm taking a video. And again, it's like, then you're never going to do it. You're never going to do it if you keep waiting for your environment to be perfect, or for you to be perfect, or for the situation to be perfect. And so this can be like continuously applied back to your health and your own journey when it comes to eating. When you're striving for that perfectionism too, it can paralyze you from moving forward. It can be so overwhelming that taking those steps doesn't even seem possible. But like Katie said, and this is one thing that we do with our clients as well, when they come to us with these big goals, these things they want to achieve, it's like, well, okay, we got to break this down, because we can't go from A to B overnight in one day, as great as that would be. So what we do is break it down week by week so that it is something that is attainable, achievable. You're making these small steps, you're celebrating your wins, not just thinking about the end goal, but kind of enjoying the journey along the way.
Absolutely. And I think, on another token, not only can it prevent us from starting, it can also prevent us from maintaining or continuing our momentum. It gives us an excuse to kind of give up if we are not kind of rising to this arbitrary standard that we've set for ourselves. So it gives us an excuse to quit, because maybe we are scared of failure. When we talk about perfectionism, we're talking about having this really high standard, and I think a lot of that comes from a fear of failure. We don't want to disappoint ourselves, we don't want to disappoint the people around us. And so I think part of dealing with perfectionism, and at the end, we'll kind of talk about how to kind of deal with it. But I think one of the big steps is to realize and really try to take in that failure is part of progress, period. It's not something to avoid, it's not something to be scared of. that is a marker to let you know you're on the right track, that you are trying, that you are attempting, right? Don't shy away from those missteps. That's where the secret sauce is. That's where you're learning. You can learn from that and then grow, move forward, and come back even better. One of the things that my clients struggle with a lot is, just figuring out what to make, right? And so I had a client where she was spending like an hour trying to find the perfect recipe, whatever that is, right? And so, especially in the age of social media and the internet, we got Pinterest, we have Instagram. We're never going to read all of the recipes. Never. We'll never get to the end. And so, that is something that, we worked on, is to kind of give yourself a time limit. Okay, I'm going to look for 5 minutes and give myself that time limit to find a recipe, and then be okay with that decision and not be like, oh gosh, there's something better out there. Again, that's going to rob you of any satisfaction if you think that the grass is always greener, or that you're never going to, you think that there's this perfect recipe out there, and there isn't. There's a million really close to perfect recipes. But the joy is not in finding them. The joy is in creating them and eating them. And if we don't get to that point, we don't have any joy, right? So don't rob yourself of that.
Yes, I totally agree. And to bring it back to the Oreo example, people mentioned the chemicals in Oreos, certain ingredients are inflammatory. And it reminded both Katie and I that we all have to start somewhere on our journey. And you get to decide where your line is when it comes to certain things. Everyone will have their quote line or their limit that they don't want to cross. For example, I was going through our household budget recently, and NB and I were talking about certain things that maybe we could cut out that were like monthly memberships. And we were going through all of them. And one of them that popped up was our composting membership. And I said, nope, that's my line. That's really important to me. I'm really glad that we compost. We have a great service here in Durham, North Carolina that does that for us. And so that was my line. I was like, I want to keep composting. I don't care. We can cut out this TV subscription or whatever, but composting is really important. And I think that's important to highlight, because what might be really important to me, which is composting, might not be important to you. You might be really into you not using any like single-use plastics. That's the line that you draw. That's really important to you. Composting, that might come later, but for you, single-use plastics are really important to you. And again, single-use plastics might become important to me later down the road. It's an evolution, it's a journey. And as we draw one line in the sand, like let's say with composting, then eventually maybe there's another line that we draw in the sand that is also really important to us, like single-use plastics or something like that.
Especially with social media, it's very easy to kind of sit behind our computer and be anonymous, and maybe sometimes not even anonymous, but we can be.
It's
we
true.
don't we don't have to look at that person in the eyeballs and say, why would you eat Oreos when it has this in it, right? With a lot of judgment. And it's so easy to sit in your own shoes and look at someone else and judge. And like Ashley and I were saying, we all have to start somewhere. And so they may be in the beginning of their journey. So someone who is just starting to go on their plant-based journey, and they come on and say, oh my gosh, like I found out that Oreos are accidentally vegan. This is amazing. So I have an option for dessert. So that is not a failure. That is, for them, that is a win, because they have chosen to go plant-based and maybe start to draw their line where they're not having dairy in their desserts. So for them, that is a win. We can all help each other learn. And, maybe you don't know what's in Oreos. And maybe if you did find out what's in Oreos, maybe you would avoid them. And that's fine. That's your line. But I think, especially as a community, we're all in this maybe for different reasons, but generally we all want to leave the planet better than we left then we got it. And we want to have our health as kind of our priority. And for most of us, we want to enjoy things that are as cruelty free as possible. And guess what? We are on Earth, and being a human on Earth leaves an impact, right? And so none of us are going to get out of participating in kind of the industrial food machine where none of us are going to leave with clean hands. So everything has an impact. So be it carbon footprints or water or deforestation or effects on animals. I don't like this example, but I'm going to share it because it's a good reminder. So, when it comes to where you're drawing your line, none of us are going to be perfect, right? If we are on the planet and we are eating, we are having an impact on the planet. And one example, a lot of people that kind of label themselves or identify themselves as plant-based or vegan, we talk about avocados all the time. Oh my God, we love avocados. We love avocado toast, and it's a healthy fat, and we love, 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 right? When a new avocado farm is planted, thousands of gophers are killed in order to have that avocado farm there because gophers love avocados, apparently. And so, how many plant-based people and vegan people do you know that enjoy avocados? A ton, right? None of us are getting out of here with clean hands. So you have to take responsibility on kind of what your line is, and be okay with the fact that your line may not be the same as your neighbor's line. So I am all for advocacy and spreading information, but what really irks me is when it comes with a lot of judgment, because some people, I have a client that lives in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. She doesn't have a Whole Foods. She doesn't have a lot. Her grocery store has limited offerings. She doesn't have the benefit of plant-based cheeses, or her plant-based milks are very limited. It's so easy to be like, oh, shop local farms, perfect. A lot of people are in an urban area and don't have access to a farmer's market, right? So you have to be okay with people starting from where they're starting. And certainly we can, as a community, teach each other and learn from each other, as long as it's without this judgment, because that's where that, especially people like me who, our self-worth is all wrapped up into kind of like maybe some external forces, and we're dealing with, oh my gosh, I'm not up to this standard, and this person told me so. I mean, they can carry that judgment, this anonymous judgment, one liner on a comment. They can carry that for a long time. And so, what Ashley and I try to remind everybody about is that community is so important. And so I think part of our responsibility is being a supportive community and realizing that we want to celebrate those wins as small as they are. Even if you've already celebrated and you're already way past that, to look at someone, don't spend your time commenting on why would you eat the Oreos, right? Find someone that's just starting and lift them up and let them know that they're doing a good job, because that's going to have a snowball effect. The people that they are, I have clients where none of their family are plant-based, and their journeys are inspiring their families who they would have never thought would have gone plant-based or gone vegan, are starting to participate. So, I mean, it's a spider web effect. So lift everybody up so they can lift the people around them up, and have that snowball effect, rather than this pulling everybody down, because gosh, life's too short for that, man.
It is. It really is. I know as you were talking, Katie, I was thinking about several conversations that I've had in my decade plus of being plant-based, whether it was intentional or unintentional, how I just felt guilty for not being plant-based enough or vegan enough. And I'm sure you listening, especially if, well, whatever journey you've been, I'm sure you listening can relate to that to some extent, whether you're plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, or just starting out. There's a lot of challenges that arise. I mean, I remember someone shaming me for using regular floss and not vegan floss. And of course, I was like, wait, floss isn't vegan. Like I just didn't eat, I didn't think about it. Or I going to a, and you mentioned community, Katie, and I think to take that even a step further, it's like a community that you can trust and you feel comfortable in, because sometimes vegans can judge other vegans pretty harshly. And so
Yeah.
exactly what Katie's referring is finding that community that uplifts you, that supports you, that encourages you, because that's going to go so much further than, shaming you for using regular floss.
Yeah. And I think I've said this on the podcast before, but from an advocacy perspective, I appreciate PETA and kind of what they do. And they've made a lot of changes, and, they've changed legislation, and they've inspired a lot of people. And there is a place for, kind of shock and awe. Like there is a place for that. That is not Ashley and my place, right? So I want to inspire people and meet them where they are. And, I want to let them know that we are here to support them and welcome them and celebrate where they're at. Because if you just approach it from an ethical vegan perspective, if I shame someone enough that they're like, okay, I quit, it's too hard, guess what? That's not going to save any animals. But if they do meatless Mondays, that's going to save way more than zero than meat 3 times a day, right?
Yep.
So, from an advocacy perspective, I'm just not a believer in this guilt and shame within our community. I really feel I will have, and I can only speak for me, I will have the biggest impact to raise people up and help them with that transition and make it as seamless and easy as possible, instead of focusing on how hard it can be.
Part of the reason we're so passionate about this is because Katie and I have definitely experienced our own versions of guilt and shame, just in various different degrees on our own health journey, our own journeys. And we see that in our clients as well. And so that's something that we are constantly trying to battle in a good way against, because we just believe that encouragement, and again, going back to just lifting one another up, goes such a long way and is so much more empowering and affirming versus the other. And I even remember this. So, Katie, when I first went plant-based, I don't know if you remember this, but I was pretty hardcore for like a period of 3 years where I was like pretty whole food plant-based SOS free. And I noticed, because you go plant-based, then you hear about, oh, well, then there's whole food plant-based. And it's okay, well, let's take it even a step further and go whole food plant-based SOS free, which stands for salt, oil, and sugar free. And there are a lot of plant-based doctors who encourage that way of eating. There's a lot of research to support that it can be very beneficial, especially if you have a lot of chronic illnesses. And so it's like, okay, well, let's just, continue to take this step further, step further, step further. But if you're doing things at the expense of your relationship with food, or if it's causing harm to you and how you view food or yourself, or again, you're constantly striving for that quote perfect way of plant-based living, if it's at the expense of yourself, it is definitely not worth it. Sometimes when we're constantly drawing those lines for ourselves, as in, and when we say lines, like just boundaries that we believe are aligned with us, sometimes when we draw them, we can always take them back. So just like composting, if that was really hurting my budget, then I might have to put composting aside for a few months or a year or forever if that was the case. And so we have to think about, okay, what's kind of the, I don't, is it like a cost benefit analysis, Katie?
Yeah.
Like, at what expense are we striving for X, Y, and Z? And so thinking about just your own health, your own mental health as you're kind of going through this journey as well. Mental
Yeah,
health.
I love that you mentioned that. I think my clients and I are constantly talking about that, where you need to decide again, and doing a cost benefit analysis is a perfect way to kind of make it black and white. So there's not so much emotion involved where you're like, am I a bad person for not doing this? Your budget is your budget. Your time budget is your time. You have this amount of time, and if you have 30 minutes to make dinner, guess what? You can't do that hour-long recipe, right?
True.
So, if your budget is $100, then whole food, plant-based, if you live in the middle of nowhere with no access to a farmer's market or something like that, that may not be that may not be possible at that moment, right? And so certainly we can all look at things and be like, okay, how can we better ourselves? And we can have goals and things like that. But I think with the going back to the definition of perfectionism, it's setting unrealistic goals of being and the goal being perfect, because that doesn't exist. There is no
Yep.
perfect vegan out there. There is no perfect healthy person out there, right? We all live in a very imperfect world, and humans are an imperfect species. And so, when you're setting goals, and this is a lot of, if you work with Ashley and I, you realize that our goals that we set every week with our clients are very small, digestible, and achievable, right? That they are actually, we're setting our environment up where those goals are going to be easily attained, rather than being like, okay, in a week I want to be whole food, plant-based SOS. you know
Right.
and that is just not, that's just not realistic. So, a big part of kind of getting away from that perfectionist attitude is realizing that goals are great, wanting to improve ourselves, that's fantastic. I'm always looking to see, how I can be a better person, human, uh, friend, neighbor, that kind of thing. But I want to make sure that those goals are realistic and aren't, taking over, that we do that cost benefit analysis. Is that goal worth giving up what you have to giving up, or sacrifice what you have to sacrifice, or is it not worth it? And be like, okay, we're not there yet. How do
Right.
we, can we cut that in half? Can we make it more digestible? Again, if you want to be plant-based Monday through Friday, perfect. On the weekends, free for all, do what you want, go out to dinner, order whatever's on the menu. If you want to do it that way, great, right? You have to draw that line. Don't let other people tell you where your line is. You have to do what's best for you with the tools that you're given.
That reminds me, Katie, actually, of we'll get questions on social media, and it reminds me of a question that we got about, should I eat organic or should I eat all organic? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what's your budget? What do you have access to? It's so much more of a complex answer than, yes, eat 100% organic, because also too, there are studies out there that are supportive of organic and studies that are like, there really isn't much of a difference. So again, it all goes back to, is it going to hurt your pocketbook if you eat all organic? No. Then if you want to do it, go for it. It's, again, yeah, that cost benefit analysis, like we talked about several times.
So because I'm kind of a nerd, and I, one of the things that if you work with me, we're going to talk a lot about behavior and habit change and kind of the science behind how and why we do the things that we do. And so one of the things that I want to stress is something called negativity bias. And so for the listeners out there, I'm going to pose a question and I want to see where your mind automatically goes. So, easy question: how are you today? So you're out there and I ask you that question, how are you? Your mind, not to, typically for most humans, your mind is going to go to the list of things that you're either struggling with or you need to do, or the things that need to be fixed. So we call that negativity bias, where your brain automatically focuses on kind of the negative, right? That is a survival technique that we use back in kind of caveman days, where, okay, that caveman over there chewed on that red berry and now he did. Right?
Shoot.
And so the other cave people are like, oh, better not eat that berry because we put two and two together. And so that berry makes us dead. We'll avoid it. Right. And so that's how we have survived for so long, because we test the environment. And if it chops us in half. We don't do that as much, like little kids. First time they touch the stove, oh, not going to do that anymore, right? But we don't need that quite as much anymore, but it is very prevalent in our kind of human psyche where our brains just focus on what needs to be fixed, the negative, the things that are quote unquote broken. Asking the simple question, how are you? I'd be interested to know how many of you out there was like, oh my gosh, I'm fantastic. This happened today and I love my family and I had a great smoothie this morning. Probably not many of you are going to be that celebratory. You're going to go to that laundry list of things that we need to do. So, why are we talking about this? From one aspect, I think it's important to realize how powerful your words are. So to give an example, if you look back and kind of think about the compliments that you've had in your life, and then you think about all the bad things that maybe people have said, I can maybe think of maybe two compliments. But I can think of a whole bunch of reviews from employers. Like I'll only focus on like the one thing that they say that I can improve. Former partners, you are with them for a long time and they probably showered you with compliments, but you can only focus on kind of those negative things that they say. And so that's human nature. And so to know that, the reason we're bringing up in this podcast is your words are powerful. So just something like, again, not to beat a dead horse, but if you're talking about, kind of shaming someone for eating Oreos, they can hold on to that for many, many years. I think it's so much better. And I think it helps our personal practice of gratitude and just being a support system for people in the community is to take that energy and recognize something to celebrate, because that takes effort, that takes energy, and that takes practice for others and for ourselves. So again, that's why we want to concentrate so much on celebrating those small wins, because we're not used to that. Especially when Ashley can probably attest to this too, when we work with our clients, the first couple weeks that we're working with them, it's hard for them to come up with celebrations of the week. They're like, I don't know, maybe I did this, but a month or two in, they're like, I did this and this and this and this and this and this and this.
True.
And they're like, they cannot wait to tell you about all the awesome things that they're doing. And guess what? That's where the willpower comes from. That's where the momentum comes from. That's what's going to carry you through those times where you're like, oh, should I be doing this? Or man, I don't have the energy to do this. That's the secret sauce. That's going to change that inner narrative. Be like, oh, I'm weak. I can't do this. Like, oh, it's too hard. Or you're not doing it perfect. So why don't you just give up? That's literally from my former inner narrative. If anyone was wondering. But so now we want to change that inner narrative to, oh my gosh, I had so many wins this week. It's ridiculous, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, you can trust yourself because you are, proving to yourself that you are making decisions towards those goals. And by making those goals achievable, it's so much easier to do. It's so much easier to get there. And it's so much easier to celebrate because you make those goals achievable. It's realizing that negativity bias is human nature. So that is kind of working against us anyway. We need to be aware of that so we can counteract that with, those small celebrations.
All right. So Katie, I'm getting a little concerned here because I know that there are some perfectionists like ourselves, recovering perfectionists, who are listening to this and going, okay, this is something that I really struggle with. So what can we do? What are maybe some tips that we can take away to apply to our own life to kind of help us just work through some of this rough stuff that we're struggling with?
So I think the first one is realizing again that negativity bias, that those patterns are there, and realize that if it took you 40 years, because I'm 40 this year, if it took you 40 years to make those patterns, that those patterns aren't going to be broken overnight, but just recognizing that those patterns are there, and that there are steps that we can take to break those patterns, because that's all they are. It's not your identity, it's just behavior, it's just patterns, it's just habits. So we can definitely break them, but they won't happen overnight. So again, that comes from that perfectionist attitude where, if it doesn't happen overnight, then it's not worth it. It is worth it.
So what you're saying is basically recognize when those negative patterns start to form and work on breaking them, or like being aware that they're happening so that you can start to change them.
Yes. So
Okay.
I'm going to challenge you, Ashley. Do you have any negative patterns that have come up in the past?
Ooh, I do. Actually, the first thing that came to mind is like even my morning routine. I see others having this elaborate, beautiful morning routine. They start their day off very, quote, perfectly. And, typically I wake up, I might read or do a few things. I have no set morning routine other than drinking water in the mornings and some espresso. So I think sometimes I do, Katie, feel guilty that, well, I could be doing more. I could be more productive in the mornings. I could wake up earlier or whatever that is. So sometimes there's some guilt that creeps in with that right now, especially.
Oh my gosh, that is a good one, which is so funny because I bet myself and some of the other people probably look at your morning routine and are like, oh my gosh, we want to be just like Ashley.
Isn't it crazy how that works?
It is. It really, really is. I think inner dialogue is a big thing. I know that was a big thing that actually really helped me with, is realizing that, the things that I was saying about myself because I was not perfect was a big game changer for me, where I was spending all day every day for 40 years saying how lazy I was, or why can't I be enough, or like, why can't you do this, or blah, 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 blah. And so I think that's a pattern that we can change. And let's say your boss brings you in and you made a big mistake. Maybe you're an accountant and you forgot a zero or something. Instead of saying, I'm so stupid, God, I'm the worst employee in the world, you can think, oh, okay, I'll know better for next time. I learned from it. Let's move on. Just noticing that pattern and changing it can make a huge difference in your everyday life and just kind of how you feel in your own skin, right?
So
Yeah.
number two is really, it sounds like changing your inner dialogue. Like if
Yeah.
you have a negative thought or you say something negative about yourself, try to reframe that to where it's either neutral or positive. Like you said, like, quote, I'm so stupid, but maybe change that to I'll know better for next time. I think that's a great example.
Number three, we've been talking about it throughout the whole podcast. So very, very important. Celebrate your victories, no matter how small. So again, that is to counterbalance that negativity bias. And I love that she mentioned in the last one, we can stay neutral as well as positive. It doesn't have to go and bleed into that kind of toxic positivity where we can do no wrong, but we want to get into the habit of celebrating the victories. And that can be writing it down, looking in the mirror, telling someone about it, journaling, but make sure that your brain is actively realizing and recognizing that you have done something and achieved something that you set for yourself. So that is going to help trust yourself and realize that, if you set a plan in motion, that you can follow through.
I love that. And we have several resources for you. If this is something that you do struggle with and you want to take it a step further and maybe learn a little bit more or figure out how you can slowly change some of these habits or behaviors, we've included some resources in the show notes for you. One is a book, well, both books. I know, Katie, you're passionate about both of these. Is one, The Power of Bad, which is how the negativity effect rules us and how we can rule it. And then we have another book from James Clear called Atomic Habits. You may or may not have heard of it. That's a really great book to learn more about habits and behaviors and how you can make those small changes that add up to big results over time. If you want to take this even a step further, and if this is something that you struggle with and you want just more accountability, more support, we do offer one-on-one coaching, and we'd be happy to hop on an initial call, make sure that we're a good fit, and work with you if that's something that you are interested or passionate about as well. Because we are definitely passionate about helping you.
If you can't tell.
Yeah. Katie, I am so glad that we did this. It was such a great idea. Thank you for putting this together so that we could share it with our lovely listener, you. Thank you so much for listening with us today. We appreciate you. We're grateful for you. Thank you for being here.
Until next time, keep thriving.